Are you ready to unlock the secrets of brand innovation? Here you'll discover unexpected ways to make your brand soar in value. Get ready for inspiring stories, actionable tips, and insights you'll need to build your brand and learn an entirely new way to fly. This is the Hummingbird Effect. And now your host, Wendy Coulter.
Hi everyone, I'm Wendy Coulter, and I help CEOs and marketing leaders unlock the hidden power of their brands. For years, business leaders have focused on marketing tactics, but what truly matters is building a strong brand. Have you ever experienced a hummingbird effect? Like the co-evolution of the hummingbird and the flower, this is when small innovations in branding or marketing can lead to surprisingly big results in other unrelated areas of a business, like an increased valuation, a stronger culture, a need to introduce a new product, or an operational breakthrough. Welcome to the show. Thanks for being here, everyone. I'm excited, as always, to have Hanna Jernigan with me. Hanna is my marketing strategist at Hummingbird Creative Group. And great to see you today, Hanna. Good morning.
You too. Good morning.
So we've got someone coming on the show today that has a lot of experience growing and selling businesses. So I'm super excited about that today. And that being said, he's kind of starting into a new venture, and I just had a fabulous meeting with a woman who has started a skincare line. And we're helping her try to figure out some go-to-market strategies. And we've just had an exciting morning in the office today because Hanna is newly engaged. And so she's got that wedding on the horizon, and the Fafa Biotics is the name of the brand that we were talking to this morning. And the woman brought Hanna and I both some new skincare.
Yeah.
So you're going to start getting ready for...
Get my glow on.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah.
So that's some exciting news today. But we're kind of in that world of new businesses getting started and talking about the future and perhaps, selling someday and what that means. And so I think our guest today is it's great timing. And so I'd like to introduce Glenn Poulos. Glenn is, like I said, kind of a serial entrepreneur. So welcome to the show, Glenn.
Well, thanks for having me, Wendy, and nice to see you, Hanna, and congratulations on your upcoming nuptials.
Thank you.
And I have some skincare issues this morning, so I could use some skincare myself today. But yeah, hopefully it doesn't show up too badly on camera today.
Normally, Glenn, I would have some fun facts about you, but I did get distracted when looking because your new puppy is just way too cute, and I got sidetracked trying to get my own French bulldog. So he has a very cute French bulldog, and that's my fun fact.
Yeah.
Oh, I love that.
I have actually two French bulldogs, Jean-Jacques and Pierre, and
I love them even more.
yeah, and I just pray they don't enter what I call Satan mode while we're on the recording, because they're quiet for hours on end, and then they have a 5-minute spurt of absolute insanity, and just praying for good luck.
I kind of want to see the insanity.
I do.
Oh, it's funny.
Since we're on camera too, we'll just, you can hope to not have it, because I know how that is, because I've got a pup too. And we'll all hope to see that sometime during the show today. So tell us more about you, Glenn, and your journey, kind of what's gotten you to where you are today. And it sounds like you're on a new venture. So tell us about that.
Yeah, so essentially, 40 odd years ago, I started as a federal public worker. I work for the federal government in Canada. And as the story goes, my boss pulled me aside one day and he told me I wasn't really cut out for government work and that I would probably be better off in sales. And so I actually took him at his word and started looking around and ended up applying for jobs, technical sales jobs, and ended up leaving the government and all the, and everything that means, and striking out as a salesperson, right? And that was in 1985. And so 40 odd years ago, I guess. And I worked for that company for about 6 years. And I'd learned a lot, lots of great things and lots of stories. It might come up later, but I wrote a book called Never Sit in the Lobby. And a lot of the lessons I learned in those early days are reflected in the book. And it's 57 tips on how to build a career in business and in sales. And but in 1991, I decided that, although sales can be very lucrative, owning a sales company appeared from all glances of the owners of that business to be more lucrative than being a salesperson. So I started my own sales company with a couple of other guys, and we ran it for 15 years. And in the early 2000s, we sold it. We had a nice exit, and then I got a chance to actually I actually was either going to go and get another job or start another company. And I don't think I'd ever really applied for a job. So for me, it was easier just to start another business. And so in 2007, I started another sales business, which I ran successfully until 2022, which is the year the book came out, as a matter of fact. And so I came out with a book, and I sold my company in 2022, and I worked for them for 3 years. And that finished up in December, on basically New Year's Eve of last year. And, and then I was bought by private equity. And so I finished working for them, handing over the reins of my company. And I bought a business in Florida in a different market, selling to different customers, but a similar kind of business, sales company. So the functionality was the same, but everything else was different. The target market, the products, everything else was different, including the country. So I'm now in Florida instead of Canada, and so now I'm on my third time. I'm not sure. Both of the first two companies I ran for 15 years. I don't think I'm going to do this one for 15 years, given I'm 62 years old now. I guess it's possible, but unlikely that I'm, but I'm, giving it another go in a different market, and that sort of brings me up to today. I've been in sales my whole career, building, running, and operating sales businesses. And then, unfortunately, I've been lucky enough to sell them as well.
Congratulations, and congratulations on private equity. A lot of people dream of that.
Yeah.
And I've seen the good side of private equity and the bad side of private equity. And so, it sounds like you're out, and that's probably the good side of private equity for most people. Yeah. But I think it's really interesting the number of years you've got behind you, because you and I are similar in that respect, and how much sales and marketing has changed over all of these years. And so when I heard you say the name of your book was Don't Sit in the Lobby, I think that's what you said. I'm thinking to myself, wow, I actually haven't even had an opportunity to sit in the lobby in a long time in my sales cycle, but I do remember those days. And so the word lobby is different today, right? Like that might have to do with sitting on social media, waiting for someone to respond to you, or, all different kinds of things in the world today.
Absolutely.
That's so different. And so I probably need to read your book, though, since you only wrote it a few years ago. It might be really, really beneficial. And then I think from the sense of just being on the sales side, we haven't had too many people on the show who have been on the sales side of things. I think it's going to be really interesting to hear your perspective on a hummingbird effect. And so I'm just going to go ahead and jump in and ask you to share with us, if you can, think of a specific story you can tell us, or an instance where a seemingly small change in a company's marketing or brand strategy led to a significant and positive outcome or results for the business in another area. What do you think?
Yeah, so that was a great question. I've been thinking of it, and in my last company, which of course is sort of top of mind, my new company, I'm still learning the ropes and the customers, and so I don't have as many stories to relate back to. But we had a marketing campaign focused on, it's called fixed wireless access. And essentially, if you think of rural communities anywhere in North America where it's hard to get fiber to the customer, it's hard to get internet, they often use wireless internet. Of course, now they've got the the direct access from Elon Musk, the satellite systems, but we sold systems that help customers get internet, right? And the goal was simple: generate awareness in underserved markets where fiber wasn't available. And the campaign we used a mix of targeted ads, educational content, webinars, all explaining, and highlighting the advantages of using this technology in hard to reach areas. And what we didn't really anticipate was the ripple effect, and as interest spiked, our logistics and supply chain had to completely change the way they handled demand in these regions that we hadn't traditionally served before. And so it led to a complete rethinking of the way we handled and distributed products regionally, whereas we were more centralized in our approach before. And so we had to expand partnerships with local installers and service providers in order to get at this new, influx of opportunities in an area we'd never been before. So it was sort of a great opportunity, but but it completely changed the way we had to do things, right? And so a campaign that sort of started as marketing transformed the way we handled the fulfillment and the service and even the product packaging to make it easier to deploy for customers in those areas. And I think it was sort of a perfect example of how marketing, when it aligns with a business need, can act as a catalyst for change across the entire organization.
Can you talk a little bit? I mean, this is in a kind of innovative space when we talk about wireless. But can you talk about the innovations that had to happen in order for that shift to happen with the distribution?
Yeah, I mean, essentially, we were sort of two warehouses on either side of the country, right? And we were traditionally we've been shipping to large carriers, national carriers, like mostly cell phone companies. You think of Verizon, AT&T, T-Mobile, things like that, right? But this, we were now serving small communities, that were rural in nature. And we weren't able to, the difference was we couldn't just send it from Dallas, and North Carolina. I mean, we had to actually move our product and our delivery mechanisms right into these areas and, into like Montana and Idaho and places like that where we were serving. And we had to set up partnerships with companies that could help us to deploy, deliver, and install this, whereas we'd never had to do that before. And before it was kind of ship it and forget it. The carriers would take care of it. But this was kind of a different approach, hitting directly approaching the customers that were using the technology, and they needed a certain amount of hand-holding and the like. So that's kind of the difference that we were experiencing and how we handled it.
Yeah, so you really had to also shift the service
Yes, totally.
area as
Yeah.
well. Talk about how that change was implemented, and how you feel like you were able to achieve success.
So the biggest change was that we had to work with partners because we weren't able to scale ourselves fast enough, right? We were successful in different areas of the country where we weren't really sure where they would be and when they would pop up. And so before, whereas we were more sort of vertically integrated ourselves in terms of we did everything. We brought the products in, we marketed them to the customers, we sold them to customers, we delivered them and what have you. But now we had to quickly set up and create partner programs that allowed us to work with smaller regional companies that had a stake in the community and could work with those end users on getting them up and running quickly. And that's the biggest change, was doing it internally versus using external contractors and service providers and guys we call two bobs in a truck, basically, right? And spread out across the, North America. So
did you have to shift the marketing along the way too, to kind of make that all work well together since the delivery process changed? And how did a shift occur because of that as well?
Yeah, essentially, well, the one biggest change that comes to my mind, the top of mind, is that we before we were sort of a little farther up the food chain and who we were dealing with. We were dealing with mainly the carriers that were marketing to the people that maybe had cell phones and things like that. But now with this new products and technologies, we're dealing to the user that was using it. And so, our messaging had to change significantly to appeal to the actual person paying X dollars per month for a service, and appealing to the, the issues and challenges that the, John Q. Public has versus a large company servicing that market, right? So that was a huge learning curve for us. And we actually had to attract and obtain some new staff that sort of came from that space, because it's kind of, the messaging is different when you're talking to, a large company versus the end user, right? And the needs are different. The language is different. You have to appeal to a very broad audience of customers. You don't know who's going to be needing your service, right? And so, yeah, there was a lot of learning involved and a lot of adaptation.
Yeah. Well, and it's like everything changed, right? As the result of this idea that we're going to go into these underserved markets, there were a lot of pivots, it sounds like, that really had to happen. Can you talk about the bigger impact of that on the business itself? The change in sales, leads, engagement. How did it really impact the results and the metrics?
Well, so, I mean, we as we adjusted our operations, to support the demand, we also had to make sure that our messaging evolved with it, right? We didn't want to just generate interest. We wanted to make sure we set clear expectations and built trust in this new sort of market, right? So we had to update our messaging to highlight the improved delivery capabilities. We had to focus on explaining them about regional support, the fact that we were now partnering with local experts. And this made a big difference sort of in the customer confidence ultimately. And they could see we weren't just pushing products, we were investing in their success, investing sort of in the community. And we were local. We were a national company, but with a local presence, right? And, and making sure they had the support and the infrastructure to deploy it properly. And so, yeah, I mean, those are just some of the things that come to mind that have changed and evolved. Yeah.
When there's so much change going on at one time, sometimes that can be like super stressful on the culture and the team. Did you see positive outcomes though? I mean, this going into underserved markets, that's really not just it certainly wasn't just a sales play. It's actually a service, right? It's an amazing service for the community. So did you see changes and positive outcomes in terms of company culture and employee morale that came out of this whole thing as well?
So as the initiative took off and the demand grew, we realized our team structure had to evolve with it to keep up, right? And so we expanded our sales coverage in the newly created regions or territories, as if you call it, and we had to add reps who understood the local market dynamics and could respond. And so, when it came to morale and culture and what have you, the growing of the business was oftentimes when you're growing and adding people, that kind of drives increase in morale. It's kind of if you look at the opposite too, when you're shrinking people and, shrinking your markets and stuff, I mean, obviously that's very detrimental to morale, right? So the opposite is true, right? So as we were growing and there were new opportunities, new jobs were coming up, and some people that were formerly sort of inside workers, were able to actually apply for jobs they never really thought that they would qualify for, and sort of go into sales and more customer focused activities, right? And so I know those people were definitely happy, and and of course we had to, on the operations side, all of our operations had to grow. We had to bring in additional support for logistics, fulfillment, so to make sure we could keep up with the volume without sacrificing delivery speed, or the service quality, right?
there's so many effects in this one,
Mhm.
right? This story is a little different than others we've heard because it's impacting so many different things at one time. What are your thoughts on
Yeah.
that? Yeah.
So just to kind of recap and bring everyone back together, you had a stable, successful way of marketing and selling to the larger companies. But then when you shifted to this more rural area plan, you had to get much more targeted and personal. It wasn't just the marketing that changed. You had people that you needed, the way you operated, even the way you told your story had to be different. So, with all of that in mind, what did you learn as someone that has bought and sold businesses from making the shift? How has it changed the way you approach marketing and growth today?
Well, I mean, I guess what I learned from the experience is that if you're not evolving and changing, you're kind of like shrinking and dying, right?
Yeah.
If I can say it that way, right? The real success comes from how the rest of the business responds and adapts, right? And, you can come up with a good campaign that generates leads, but if the organization's not ready to support, that interest operationally and strategically, you can really miss the boat, right? And blow a great opportunity. So, you know, we were able to build and adapt our cross-functional collaboration where it was a little bit more integrated, and we'd been in business a long time and we had sort of did what we did the way we did it, and we had to kind of learn new ways of doing everything, and all the teams had to evolve and adapt and
Right.
measure, monitor, and feedback loops, and make sure we were doing it correctly, because it really is quite a different the volumes were different, the personality of the customer was different. Literally everything was different, right? And as I said, most of what we learned came from listening to our customers and being willing to, pivot quickly when the doors opened. Even when we didn't know that the opportunities were going to come, we had to be, kind of very nimble. I guess this is what
Yeah.
I'm trying to say, right? So.
Can you talk a little bit more about the nimbleness and kind of advice that you would give around that? Because it is, I mean, from what you're saying, you were in a pretty stable world, but you saw an opportunity and you took it and you didn't know what the outcome was going to be, but you were willing to give it the resources to learn and to grow. And that's hard for people always to do. So can you just kind of talk about any advice you have there, or
Sure.
how you can encourage other people to look at those opportunities?
Yeah, for me, being nimble and adapting sort of comes down to a few key principles, right? So one is obvious. I mean, some of these are obvious, but I'll state them. So staying close to your customers and monitoring their market signals that they're sending you, right? You need to be constantly listening. I love saying God gave you 2 ears and 1 mouth, so you do the math, right? And, you got to be listening twice as much as you're talking, right? If you're not in tune with that, it's hard to pivot, right? You need to build an environment of flexibility, right? Where the status quo is not acceptable any longer, right? You have to be getting ready that you're going to be changing, and you might have to change quickly. And the funny thing is that technology changes rapidly as well. So we were constantly changing and adapting based on the technology as well, right? I guess another part is sort of rapid iteration. Instead of waiting for the perfect plan, we'd have to gather feedback, refine, and deliver, right? And then measure the results, tweak it, and then redeploy, right? It wasn't like one master plan for the year and we're going to roll it out. We would be, doing that 12 times a year kind of a thing, right? So rapidly iterating new and evolving methodologies. And of course, the biggest sort of key to success is empowering your team to make decisions without waiting for top-down approval.
Yeah.
And, one of the things that it's kind of a side story, but it's sort of relevant, in the company that I had sold in 2022, one of the earliest rules that I created when I started the business was every person in the business, right down to people in the warehouse, people driving the tow motors, everyone had a dollar value. The lowest amount was $100, but it went up from there, to quite high numbers where you had a personal dollar value, where if any customer presented a problem to you and you could solve it within your dollar value, you didn't need to ask anyone. You just solved the problem, documented the solution and moved on. For instance, a guy in shipping, he gets a call, customer's complaint, the shipment was late. It was an $89 bill. His limit was $100. He said, you know what? Your shipping's free, right? That kind of a thing. Someone else might have a $250 or a $500 limit. The product showed up. It wasn't in the condition they thought. You know what? We'll replace it. We have a new one dispatching today. Again, they didn't have to talk to the manager. The manager talked to the manager, and also, I just found that that empowerment for people was something they loved having, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And we also rewarded people on how often they were able to use that. And we bonused them for not only doing it, but, for taking the opportunity to deliver on customer service. We gave them additional bonuses for doing it, right?
So did you have an experience that led to that? Or is that just something that you were passionate about? Like, was it?
It was a long time ago, so it was before podcasts, but it was something like a podcast where I'd heard a guy say, give everyone a dollar value and make sure they can solve any customer problem without, even if it's $5, $10, $100. Mine was $100, but somebody mentioned it. I listened to it. I love the idea of it, and I implemented it, and we had it throughout the entire history of the business, and it was it was used all the time, right? And it gave people an ability to solve problems, but be a part of the solution, and not just say, oh, I don't know, I have to talk to my manager, and those are such frustrating for the customers, right?
Yeah, I think giving them the ability to own it just creates a great culture, but also they become a part of solving problems. So it elevates anyone in any position when they can be a part of solving problems.
Did you find that everyone kind of had a little bit more buy-in because they understood the full picture? Whereas whenever they have a problem, they bring it to their manager then takes it and resolves it. They don't know what happened. They don't know why it happened. Do you feel like from the top down, everyone was just a little bit more bought in and you were able to function better as a company?
Yeah, absolutely. And they all felt more empowered, and through the empowerment led, sort of an increase in the culture. I think the cultural value of the business, right? And morale, basically. And I think people felt happier because they could solve problems and didn't need to defer. And they felt more invested in the solution because they were the ones delivering it and making decisions. And people are, tend to be, most people are responsible with their own money. So when you're empowering them with a certain amount of money, they tend to be responsible with it.
Right.
Right. It wasn't like they were sending $100 checks at everybody that phoned, right? Like there's what was the problem? Okay, fine. You know what? That was our part, and it was this or that. Let me solve it by doing this, right? And, so I found that they were very invested in the solution and felt a part of it, right?
Hey listeners, if you're enjoying the Hummingbird Effect, there's a special treat just for you. The team has put together a free downloadable resource that maps out 20 reasons why having a branding strategy is essential for your business. It's packed with valuable insights that help you understand the power of effective branding. Don't miss out. Download it now by visiting the website hummingbird-creative.com or checking the link in the show notes.
We have a Hummingbird Circle on our LinkedIn. If you're small plug, everyone should come join if you're not in there. But I had posed a question the other day to leaders of how to, or actually a reminder, I guess, of remembering that you put these people in their places because they're good at what they do. And if you are so caught up on what they're doing, you can't do what you do best.
Right.
And I think you're a really good example of that, where you've empowered your people so you could sit there and constantly look for opportunities and be able to change on a dime. So can you kind of talk about the people that were able to shift with you? Did you have a team looking for that? And then another team that was like keeping it moving? Like, how did you get everyone to buy in and do those quick changes?
Well, the when I sold the company, we were quite large. We were over $80 million in business, but we were under just over 50 people, right? So there wasn't a lot of teams to be teamed to, right? So a lot of it was very, close to the ground, right? And I mean, so like, for instance, I was always, explaining to people that, if the toilet was plugged, in the bathroom, I often was the one that was plunging, right?
Right.
And that problem always rose right to the top, right? I don't know why. People didn't want to solve that problem on their own. And so, it wasn't like we had a lot of like strategic teams in place, doing it. But really, what resonates with me when you're asking the question was that the people were leveraging what they saw by example, right? And, one of the things I've always stressed to people is that whatever leadership position you're put in, even if you're the first line of defense, the job of a leader is to make decisions, right? And to guide the direction of the team. And so when you're put in a leadership position, make decisions, don't hum and haw, don't deflect and defer, right? And so they would see that. They would come to me with a problem and I'd say, okay, this is how we're going to solve it. It wasn't like, oh, let me think about it and stress about it for the weekend and complain and moan and, grumble and groan. It would be like, okay, there's a problem. Okay, what are we going to do? What was our part in it? Let's solve it. Okay, boom. And I would try to show them by example what it means to lead and, and be a leader in the world that you have control over, right? And so, yeah, I wish I had steering committees to help me with guide all those things. but we were a very, very small company and, we're all pretty close to the action.
80 million with only 50 people is impressive. Like I'm trying to envision that, just knowing the sizes of some of the companies that we work with and the number of people that they have in place at let's say a $50 million level.
Yeah.
It's rare. And so this is a little separate from Hummingbird Effect, but I think there's got to be a lesson learned here. And maybe some people, hang their hat on luck, but I'm pretty sure there were some very intentional decisions made to be able to grow a business to that size with that few people. Can you just share a little bit about that experience? I think that's amazing.
Yeah. So one of my strategies has always been, and again, shameless plug, but a lot of these plugs are things I'm going to tell you now are in the book, right? And
Awesome.
But essentially, a lot of times we were competing against the number one brand, like a global brand with like an international, like Coke and Pepsi, right? Everyone's heard of them, right? And or else nobody ever got fired for buying IBM or HP or something like that, right? And we were a lot of times competing against those companies, but I would only ever sell the number 2 brand relative to them, right? I won't sell number 3 or number 4 because the way the Pareto principle of 80-20 works out, the people selling the number 3 and the number 4 brand end up competing on like 4% of the business. And, 80% typically goes to the big guy. And then 20%, 80% of the next 20% kind of goes to the next. And so if I couldn't have the number 1 brand, I would always work on getting the number 2 brand. And I always tell salespeople and other people that, when you take a job and you're learning the ropes in a new world, look around at your business in the first few months and figure out where are we in the pecking order of the world. Like, if we make ice cream, do we have the number 1 or number 2 ice cream? No, then quit and go work for Baskin-Robbins, because it takes just as long to sell, one kind as another. And Baskin-Robbins is going to get 80% of the business no matter what. Right. And so you only have one life to live. And so you should always be trying to sell the best product with the highest possible ratings, because selling the other things takes too much time. And there's huge, and you end up losing a lot of the time for not because you're not good, but because of people don't trust the brand, and you spend all your time explaining, who your company is and why you make ice cream rather than, talking about your brand of ice cream, right? Like Baskin-Robbins doesn't need to justify their ice cream, right? And that just came in my mind. I don't usually talk about ice cream, but and so and so by selling these, we would scour the world looking for the best possible alternatives to the number 1 brand in the business. We would bring those to customers and we would present them and their unique propositions and we would bring them, oftentimes we're always looking for the next big thing that was coming, because we were selling technology, right? We were selling wireless technology. And so, it's a rapidly evolving world. And so we were traveled the world and trade shows around the world looking for what's the next piece of technology. How's, T-Mobile and Verizon, AT&T and these companies going to deliver better service? There was 2G, then 3G, then 4G, then 5G, right? We were always on the cutting edge of finding new products to help them build and deliver in those networks. And that's how we did it. And, and we were selling to large customers with large demand. And so we were able to, some of our sales guys had, $10 or $20 million quotas, right? And, smaller customers might have only had a few $1 million quota or what have you, but that's how we were able. So some guys were able to carry large quotas selling to very large companies, right? And that's how we scaled up and to such a large number.
Glenn, given your extensive number of years, can you just talk a little bit more about innovation and how you've seen innovation play into brand building for companies in the spaces that you've played in?
Although I ran the company, right? So sales, marketing, IT, operations, they all reported to me, right? But I mean, my love has always sort of been at the front line of selling, right? And and brand building and things like that for me is kind of like marketing. For me, selling is when you're in front of the customer, closing the deal. That's kind of selling. Everything else becomes marketing. And so I often challenge customers not to not to confuse the two, right? To understand the difference between sales and marketing and make sure that the people that you've selected for those two different departments are well aligned and they have the right person in the right seat, right? Because it takes a different kind of person to be a good marketer than a good salesperson, but you need both of them, right? You can't just have one and not the other, right? So, but for me, brand building is all about being authentic and personalization, storytelling, and the technology that it's delivered on now is rapidly changing. But the reason I've sort of rambled on about that other stuff before, at the tail end of it, when it comes to selling, that really never changes, right? It's person to person, developing rapport. Maybe the medium through which you're speaking might change, but honestly, unless you're establishing genuine rapport with the customer, you probably won't get the business, right? And I often do caution people as well as don't use technology as a crutch, use it as a tool, right? Because like a lot of salespeople, they're like, oh, why do I need to make a sales call when I can just call them on Zoom? And I'm like, oh, well, I say, no problem. I said, what's written on his mouse pad? What mouse pad does he have on his desk, right? And because I was just at a customer yesterday and he had my competitor's mouse pad. So, and his coffee mug,
another one, aren't you?
Yeah, his coffee mug was from a different competitor. And guess what? The product we're selling, they already have 10 of them from another brand. So how would you know all that on Zoom? You would never find that out, right? And so, so the medium changes, and the way we message customers and stuff changes a lot. But I find at the very tail end when, somebody wants to make a multi-million-dollar decision or even a multi-thousand-dollar decision, right? I mean, it comes down to, trust, rapport, and people buy from people and people they trust, right? And brands they trust, and so.
I think trust has been a common theme throughout this whole interview, Glenn, and I think that's a great thing to kind of help us wrap this up. You've talked about staying close to the customers and building trust. And we are in such an automated world, in a world of AI, a world of all of these tools, and reminding people that those are tools and that, that's not how you build trust. You build trust in building those relationships. Hanna, any closing thoughts before we wrap up?
So we started this conversation and we've kind of shifted paths a couple of times, and it was really great to hear. But I really took away that this wasn't just about changing your marketing or your operations. It was about leadership and how you can learn from yourself and from other leaders. You had to create a culture that could adapt and empower your team to make quick decisions. You were able to listen to your customers, which is always important, and you were willing to shift your strategy fast without waiting for that perfect time or the perfect number to get your attention. So all those small, important shifts from the marketing, the shipping, your people added up to have a huge transformation for that business. 50 people, 80 million, which is huge. And then you were able to sell and go on to your next thing. So that's really the heart of what we're doing here with the Hummingbird Effect, and those small strategic changes that you're able to make and how they ripple into positive change throughout your life, your business, and everything. So it was very nice to hear from you and learn from you today.
Oh, thank you, Hannah. That was great.
So, Glenn, before you go get some ice cream today,
Yeah, going.
I think now that you've said Baskin Robbins a few times, you're going to be wanting that. Tell us more about the book. I want to give you that opportunity, how people can find you and all of that good stuff as we wrap up.
No problem. So, so the easiest way to get a hold of me if they want to talk to me in any way is through my LinkedIn. They can connect with me there. I'm very active there on a daily basis, and put out a lot of content on LinkedIn. I have a website, glennpoulos.com. You can link to me, to find me that way, but you can also find me on LinkedIn. Like I said, book is available everywhere books are sold, and it's called Never Sit in the Lobby. And it's basically a summary of all the rules that I wrote down in the 40 years of selling, on how to get, act, and stay in front of your customers, and to be a pleasure to do business with always. And that's the ultimate goal of the book. There's 57 tips, on for everything from, never sit in the lobby to, how to behave when you're out at an expensive dinner or a casual lunch with a client. And because I've seen a multitude of mistakes made, I've seen people do it the right way and the wrong way, and I just share all the tips, one at a time on how to be a better, brand ambassador for your company, and how to be a pleasure to do business with always, right? And that's my whole mantra.
I definitely want to read the book. Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure to get to know you and hear your stories. We really appreciate you giving us your time this morning, Glenn.
Thanks, Wendy. Yeah. Thanks, Hannah.
And thanks to each of you who are listening today. Take what you've learned from Glenn, all these great nuggets, and go find your own Hummingbird Effect.
Thanks for listening to the Hummingbird Effect with Wendy Coulter. We hope you found this episode valuable. Please be sure to rate and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. To learn more or to work with Wendy and her team, go to hummingbird-creative.com.